For nearly 2,000 years, millions of people have repeated one of the most famous verses ever spoken by Jesus: "Seek first the kingdom of God." But what if the most important word in that sentence was never fully understood? What if the people listening on that hillside in Galilee heard something far deeper than the word kingdom can express in English? Today, we're going back to the very language Jesus actually spoke to uncover a hidden treasure preserved within a single Aramaic word. Once you hear it the way his first disciples did, Matthew 6:33 may never sound the same again. For centuries, the original spiritual depth of many teachings spoken by Jesus became increasingly distant as his words passed through layers of translation. While the canonical Gospels remained the foundation of Christian faith, other early Christian writings disappeared from public view for generations. Then, in 1945, everything changed. Near Hammadi, Egypt, local farmers uncovered a sealed jar containing ancient codices buried beneath the desert sand. These manuscripts, now known worldwide as the Nag Hammadi Library, preserved early Christian texts that had never been included in the official biblical canon. Their discovery renewed worldwide interest in the original language, symbolism, and spiritual vocabulary surrounding the teachings of Jesus, encouraging scholars and seekers alike to look again at the Aramaic expressions that shaped his message. There is a profound reason why Jesus taught the crowds in Aramaic. It was the living language of everyday people throughout Galilee. Hebrew belonged primarily to the synagogue and sacred reading, while Greek became the language of administration and much of the written New Testament. But when Jesus healed, comforted, blessed, and revealed the mysteries of the kingdom, he spoke in the language that reached directly into the hearts of ordinary men and women. Many ancient spiritual traditions also held that Aramaic carried more than definitions. Its sounds themselves expressed intention, determination, and living resonance. For this reason, many believe that pronouncing these sacred words as Jesus spoke them helps awaken something ancient within us, a remembrance of the divine design placed in every human soul, sometimes described as reconnecting with our original spiritual nature. One of those words is Malkuta, pronounced Malkuta Ara, meaning the divine reign, the living presence of God within. This is not merely a place waiting somewhere beyond death. It describes the active reality of God, expressing his presence here and now, through hearts aligned with him. Imagine the scene described in the Gospel of Matthew, chapter 6. The morning sun rises gently over the hills of Galilee. Hundreds of people sit quietly across the green slopes, as Jesus teaches what would become known as the Sermon on the Mount. They are worried about tomorrow. They wonder how they will eat, how they will provide for their families, and what the future holds. Then Jesus speaks words that echo through history. Seek first, not wealth, not power, not security, but MALKUTA, Maldashku, TAH, the divine reign, the living presence of God within. Those listening did not imagine castles, political kingdoms, or distant heavenly realms. They heard a living reality unfolding wherever Judy's will was welcomed into the human heart. That single word carried movement, presence, authority, and relationship all at once. Perhaps the greatest surprise is that Jesus was not asking his listeners to travel somewhere else. He was inviting them to awaken to something already beginning within them. Modern readers often picture a kingdom as territory, a place with borders, rulers, and distant lands. Naturally, when we hear the phrase kingdom of God, our minds often move toward heaven as a future destination. But the Aramaic word Malkuto, pronounced Malkuta, meaning the divine reign, the living presence of God within, opens an entirely different window. Rather than describing geography, Malkuta speaks of divine activity. It points toward God's reign becoming visible wherever his presence transforms human lives. It is dynamic rather than static. It is living rather than distant. Many teachers of the Aramaic tradition understand this word as describing God actively ruling within those who surrender themselves to him. This understanding changes the rhythm of Matthew 6 completely. Notice what surrounds this famous verse. Jesus speaks about anxiety, daily needs, clothing, food, and fear about tomorrow. Again and again, he redirects his listeners away from worry and toward trust. His message is not simply, wait patiently for heaven. Instead, he calls them to live today under the loving reign of the Father. That perspective gives new life to every sentence that follows. When your priorities change, your fears begin to lose their authority. When your heart becomes aligned with God, your decisions begin to change naturally. When compassion replaces resentment, peace replaces striving, and trust replaces constant fear, Malkuta begins expressing itself through ordinary life. Seeking first is no longer an endless search for something hidden. It becomes the daily choice to place God's presence before every other concern. This is why countless readers sense that something extraordinary is hidden beneath the familiar English translation. The verse has always been powerful, but understanding the original Aramaic invites us to hear it with fresh ears, much closer to how the first listeners may have experienced it on that Galilean hillside. The invitation is not simply to believe something new. It is to begin living differently because of what Malkuta, the divine reign, the living presence of God within, awakens inside you. The next part of this journey reveals why these words may have been even more practical than most people have ever imagined. If this teaching has opened a new perspective for you, our Aramaic Wisdom Guide can help you continue this journey. After all, true knowledge sets us free. You'll find the link in the comments. And the best is yet to come in the next chapters. You'll discover what could change everything for you. Most people believe that seeking the kingdom means searching harder, praying longer, or waiting patiently for heaven. But the people sitting before Jesus on that Galilean hillside were thinking about something much more immediate. They were worried about feeding their families, finding work, and surviving another day. That is why the position of Matthew 6:33 is so extraordinary. Before Jesus speaks about seeking first Malkuta, pronounced Malkuta, meaning the divine reign, the living presence of God within, he spends an entire section talking about fear, anxiety, and trust. His words were never disconnected from everyday life. He points to the birds flying freely across the sky. They neither plant nor harvest, yet the Father continues to care for them. Then he points toward the wildflowers covering the hillsides, flourishing without striving for beauty or recognition. Every image surrounding this teaching invites the listener to exchange fear for confidence in Jodi. This changes the way we hear the word If Malkuta truly describes God's living reign already at work within us, then seeking it first is not about chasing something far away. It is about allowing God's presence to become the first influence over every thought, every decision, and every response we make throughout the day. Fear tells us to protect ourselves first. Faith invites us to trust first. Fear urges us to control everything. Jesus invites us to surrender everything. That shift may appear small, but it transforms the entire direction of a person's life. A heart ruled by fear constantly searches for certainty in possessions, status, or human approval. A heart living under Malkuta begins finding security in the presence of God, instead of the circumstances surrounding it. This is why the teaching remains timeless. The parent who responds with patience instead of anger reveals Malkuta. The neighbor who chooses forgiveness instead of resentment reveals Malkuta. The believer who remains honest when dishonesty seems easier reveals Malkuta. None of these actions create God's reign. They simply allow his reign to become visible. Perhaps that explains why Jesus described the kingdom through seeds, light, and growing life rather than political power. Everything he taught points toward transformation beginning quietly within the human heart before anyone else can see its fruit. The deeper we understand this, the more Matthew 6:33 stops sounding like a command to search somewhere else. Instead, it becomes a daily invitation to let God's presence guide every part of our lives. Imagine yourself standing among the thousands gathered on the hillside that morning. Perhaps you're wondering why these original teachings remained hidden for so long. That's why we created the Aramaic Wisdom Guide, because true knowledge sets us free. You'll find it in the comments below. The air is calm. The people listen in complete silence as Jesus teaches about prayer, forgiveness, generosity, worry, and trust. Then he speaks one sentence that has echoed across the centuries, yet few have ever heard it through the richness of its original Aramaic meaning. Seek first. Not someday, not after your problems disappear, not when life becomes easier. First, everything begins with that priority. When Malkut, the divine reign, the living presence of God within becomes the center of life, every other priority begins finding its rightful place. The external circumstances may remain difficult, but the heart no longer depends on them for peace. This is exactly what makes the Sermon on the Mount so revolutionary. Jesus never promised a life free from hardship. Instead, he revealed a way of living that remains steady in the middle of uncertainty. The transformation always starts inside before it becomes visible outside. Seeking Malkuta first changes the questions we ask each morning. Instead of asking, "What do I need to achieve today?" we begin asking, "How can Judy's presence be reflected through me today?" That single change quietly reshapes our conversations, our decisions, and even our reactions when life becomes difficult. Mercy becomes stronger than revenge. Humility becomes stronger than pride. Peace becomes stronger than anxiety. Compassion becomes stronger than judgment. These are not simply moral improvements. They are signs that Malkuta is already becoming visible through an ordinary human life. Perhaps this is why the Sermon on the Mount continues to inspire millions after 2,000 years. Jesus was not merely teaching people how to behave better. He was inviting them into an entirely new way of seeing reality, where God's reign begins within and gradually transforms everything it touches. That is why understanding the original Aramaic matters so deeply. When we hear Malkuta, as the first listeners heard it, Matthew 6:33 is no longer just a familiar verse to memorize. It becomes a living invitation to participate in the divine reign of God every single day. Right now, you might be asking yourself, why am I only discovering this truth now? Don't worry, we thought about that. We're here to help you go deeper with a guide made for this journey. The link is in the comments. As the people slowly descended the hillside that day, they carried far more than another lesson to remember. They carried a completely new way of seeing life. The worries they had brought with them had not magically disappeared, but Jesus had shown them where true security could be found. That security was never rooted in possessions, social status, or tomorrow's certainty. It was rooted in Malkuta, pronounced Malkuta J, meaning the divine reign, the living presence of good within. Once that reality settled into the heart, everything else began to take its proper place. This is why Matthew 6:33 continues to speak with such remarkable power across the centuries. Many people have memorized the verse. Far fewer have stopped to ask what the first listeners actually heard when Jesus spoke it in his own language. They did not hear an invitation to chase a distant kingdom beyond the horizon. They heard a call to live under God's reign beginning at that very moment. That realization changes how we approach every ordinary day. When fear appears, we remember Malkuta. When uncertainty surrounds us, we remember Malkuta. When difficult decisions arise, we remember that God's presence comes before our circumstances. The kingdom is no longer an abstract doctrine waiting for some future day. It becomes the quiet authority guiding our thoughts, our words, and our actions. Perhaps this explains why the teachings of Jesus have never lost their ability to transform lives. They speak first to the heart, because every lasting transformation begins there. The world constantly tells us to seek more. More success, more recognition, more possessions. But Jesus gently turns our attention in another direction. Seek God first. Let His presence become your foundation. Allow His wisdom to shape every decision before fear has the opportunity to speak. That is the invitation hidden inside one remarkable Aramaic word. And perhaps that is what the crowds remembered most. As they walked back through the hills of Galilee, they had not simply heard a sermon. They had encountered Malkuta. We are just scratching the surface of this ancient power. Get ready, because in our next video, I will reveal even deeper Aramaic codes that unlock spiritual authority you've never imagined. Make sure you are subscribed and have notifications turned on so you don't miss this unfolding revelation. Every teaching of Jesus was meant to be lived, not merely admired. So, beginning tomorrow morning, before checking your phone, before thinking about your schedule, and before allowing the worries of the day to fill your mind, pause for one quiet moment. Take a slow, deep breath. Then speak the Aramaic word Malkuta, pronounced Malkuta, meaning the divine reign, the living presence of God within. Repeat it slowly 3 times. Do not rush. Allow each pronunciation to remind you that your first priority is not fear, pressure, or uncertainty, but God's living presence already working within you. As you continue your day, whenever anxiety begins to rise or your thoughts become overwhelmed, quietly return to the same word. Let it become more than a sound. Let it become a conscious decision to place God's reign above every distraction. This is not a magical formula. It is a daily practice of remembering the invitation Jesus offered on that hillside nearly 2,000 years ago to seek God's presence first, trusting that every other part of life finds its proper place under His loving care. With time, this simple practice can reshape the way you respond to challenges, relationships, and even the smallest moments of ordinary life. Instead of reacting from fear, you begin responding from trust. Instead of allowing circumstances to rule your heart, you learn to let God's presence become your greatest influence. Just a quick reminder, the transformation guides for a fuller life are waiting for you, right there in the comments. Before you leave, if this message touched your heart or brought new understanding into your life, WRITE. The word restoration in the comments below. Your testimony may encourage someone else who is seeking healing and renewal. Thank you for sharing this moment of ancient wisdom with us. Until the next revelation, walk in peace, walk in freedom, and walk in the power of Malkuta.